Probably since the early 80s, my family has farmed in this very bottom. And always the river had been an issue, but over the past 10 to 15 years, the river seems to be more and more of an issue. I did the math earlier today, just looked up flood stages for the White River at Augusta. And during the planting or soybean planting period that runs from April 1 through June 15, every year till today is about 990 days. Of that time, roughly 6% of those days we could have planted a crop in these bottoms that the river was below flood stage and the crop would have survived. There was an additional 81 days that the river was below flood stage where we could have, but the river later came back up during the planting period to where we would have had to take a boat to be standing where we're standing. So a lot of the years that I look back on, like one year had a 30-day window that you could have planted this bottom with the river being not at flood stage. Several years it was 2 to 3 days for the entire planting period. So normally where you can start planting in April, a lot of times this ground is underwater. Like you cannot physically plant it at that point. And that's why as a producer in these areas, you value your crop insurance where you can prevent plant. But several years ago, RMA, or Risk Management Agency, the federal agency that controls crop insurance or oversees it, they changed prevent plant rules to where to prevent plant, you had to have a crop planted, insured, and harvested one of 4 years. Well, several years in a row, the entire year for this bottoms, the river was above flood stage the whole planting period. So when it comes to that, you have the Corps of Engineers who controls the river, has the river too high for you to physically plant your crop, and then your safety net on the other hand, which is a federal agency, says, oh, you don't qualify. And a lot of this water you see behind me right here, it's coming, there's several tributaries of the White River. You've got the Black River that's uncontrolled. You've got the Buffalo that a lot of people canoe down. And some of this water is coming from those tributaries. But I would say a majority is coming from the Four Lake system up above us. You've got Beaver Lake in northwest Arkansas. You've got Table Rock at Branson. You've got North Fork at Mountain Home. And then you've got Bull Shoals up in that area too. But all of the water in those lakes come to right here. A lot of it is lake water that's draining out that they have to drain out, or if the lake's busted, we would be underwater right here. So it's a tough proposition to manage both, especially when the lakes were originally made for flood control. Our county passed a policy last year that opposed RMA excluding producers from prevent plant coverage due to flooding, because it's no fault of our own. I know there's abuse of the system, but when you physically cannot plant your crop because water is over it, you shouldn't be excluded. And from that county policy, we passed it at the state level at our annual convention in December last year. And from that, it went to the National or American Farm Bureau Conference back in January in Puerto Rico. So now the policy that we made in White County, Arkansas is now not only in the State Farm Bureau Federation policy book, it's in the American Policy Farm Bureau book. With our policies in our policy book, our staff that are advocates for us at the Capitol and in DC, they can work to achieve our goals. So that's why policy is so important, because without it, their hands are tied. If it's not in our policy book, for or against, they can't do anything even though there is a need. And that wasn't even in our state policy book, and it was not in our American policy book. So now our staff advocates for the nation and our state can consult our congressmen members, our representatives, our senators, and say, hey, we might need to look at changing this. So our policy isn't anything that changes law, but it allows us to work with our representatives and our senators and for them to change the law on our behalf. For a guy like me, like I've got one voice out of thousands. So when you can make a policy that impacts the whole state, you've got the membership of Farm Bureau behind you. So it magnifies your voice, multiplies your voice, and you can get something done that way with a majority behind you versus yourself and a few others.